Shire Leasing did send us this statement.
Kevin Clark was known to Shire from a previous successful trading relationship. When Kevin Clark approached Shire, Illumina had already established a successful venture with ProLink and was ProLink's largest distributor, covering some 37 countries. Shire did carry out due diligence, as well as attending joint meetings with Kevin Clark, ProLink and the Bank of Scotland.
And what of the Bank of Scotland? There's no suggestion that they knew that the leases they bought through Shire had been sold as a package with advertising, but they certainly found out. We've obtained an email sent in September 2008 by a senior Bank of Scotland employee and circulated to 3 colleagues, which discusses how the bank is going to get the money it's owed. This explicitly refers to the promise of advertising revenue made to golf clubs.
I suspect that if we go for enforcement, we will be met with some very strong defences. The advertising will be intrinsically linked to the contract of hire. Unfortunately, Illumina cannot keep pleading they have done nothing wrong.
Yet the bank persisted in demanding its money from the golf clubs. In July 2009, the Bank of Scotland's solicitors, Rag & Co, were still writing to clubs demanding full payment of their leases and threatening legal action if they failed to comply. It wasn't until July 2010 that they finally decided to cancel all the outstanding debts, almost 2 years after they became aware that the golf clubs were unwitting victims of a deal gone wrong. We asked the Bank of Scotland for an interview. It declined, but sent us this statement.
We carried out a full review of the Illumina case and made a decision not to enforce a series of leasing agreements we had in place with a number of golf clubs. The vast majority of these agreements were assigned to us by Shire Leasing plc, and Bank of Scotland Equipment Finance was not in any way connected to advertising deals with individual golf clubs.
The Bank of Scotland has also told us the value of the leases it has written off is £2 million, another toxic asset for a bank which, as part of HBOS, had to be bailed out by the taxpayer in 2008. The Bank of Scotland is now part of the Lloyds TSB group. But what of the man behind Illumina? We wrote to him asking for an interview and had no response. We've come to where Kevin Clark lives, a vast detached house in a leafy, desirable suburb of Stratford-upon-Avon. We can see a Range Rover parked outside the front door. Just rung the bell as well. Hello, I'm Adrian Goldberg from BBC Radio 4. Are you Kevin Clark?
No, sorry.
You look like Kevin Clark. Excuse me. Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, there are lots of people who would like to hear what you've got to say. Well, we've seen photographs of Kevin Clark, and the man who came to the door looked very similar to Kevin Clark, so similar that I would suggest that it was in fact him. But he has shut the door on us and does not appear to want to have an interview with us this afternoon. The following day, Kevin Clark's lawyer confirmed that he wouldn't be speaking to the BBC, but his reticence leaves many issues unresolved. Golf club owners want to know if they'll get compensation after taking out expensive leases that weren't, as they had been told, backed by advertising. Former workers and suppliers like Dave Cotterill want to know when they'll be paid the thousands of pounds they are still owed. Their chances of recouping any cash would appear to be slim, as Kevin Clark has been declared bankrupt. Illumina aren't the only company involved in leases that have gone wrong. Far from it, and it begs questions about the level to which major banks and other financial institutions are exposed. One industry insider has told us the sums involved could run into hundreds of millions of pounds. On our sister programme, 5 Live Investigates, I've reported on businesses ranging from hairdressers to schools to GP surgeries, where companies leased equipment which ended up costing them far more than they were originally led to believe. Hairdressers around the country are still having to pay leases after renting new mirrors, the cost of which they were assured would be met by advertising which never materialised. Again, the leases were sold on to major banks, including the Bank of Scotland, who said they couldn't be held responsible for any problems that arose as they hadn't sold the leases in the first place. James Locust-Steele looks after the IT for Glemsford Primary School in Suffolk. A company encouraged them to sign a lease for new laptops, which it promised would cost nothing.
Out of the blue, our salesperson who we were dealing with phoned us up and said, "We've managed to get hold of about 1,000 laptops. Would you like any?" And initially I said, "Well, we can't afford to pay for those." He said, "Oh, no, don't worry, it's all free." And he said, "How many can I put you down for?" I said, "Well, you're sure they're free?" And he reassured me, yes, they're free. We said, "OK, put us down for 20. And he said, "Well, can I put you down for a bit more, say 100?
So why were you told that you had to sign a lease agreement if the equipment was free?
Exactly our question to them. Our answer back from them was, due to anti-competitive laws, they cannot be seen as just handing us over laptops because all the other manufacturers, they would all complain. So we had to sign an agreement that stated that we were taking these laptops. And that's how that agreement came about.
As with the golf clubs, at first the cost of the leases on the laptops was met by another company, but they went into administration last month, leaving Glemsford Primary School owing £500,000 to Clydesdale Bank, who hold the leases. It's emerged that the schools were also paying around 5 times the market rate for the laptops, but Clydesdale Bank said they have no responsibility for how the leases were sold. Glemsford Primary School is now facing the seemingly impossible task of balancing its books.
It means the school is in a lot of trouble. If the banks come chasing after us for the money, which they are, it means obviously we don't have the money in the budget for these. And the point is, we would never, ever have had these laptops if they weren't free.
And not only do you have them and are having to pay for them, you're paying it way over the true value of the laptops.
Yes, absolutely.
And what is the ultimate effect of this potentially on your school?
What we will tell the banks is if they want the equipment, you can come and get it gladly if it'll get us out of the lease. We don't have the money in the budget at all to pay for things like this. In fact, the amount the leases go up to is our annual budget.
James Locust-Steele. Even when leaseholders have been criminally deceived, they can still be pursued for the debts they owe. In November, I reported on the case of Dr. John Cormack, who was missold telephone equipment for his GP surgery in Essex. But although 2 men behind the scam were jailed for fraud last year, Dr. Cormack told me he is still liable for £40,000 owed to Siemens Financial Services, which bought the leases from a broker.
I tried the regulatory authorities, absolutely useless.
What do you want to happen?
Certainly there's someone who needs to look at the law here, but because people are riding coach and horses through it. And I think they should compensate the victims. I mean, it has had a serious effect on the health and well-being of a lot of these people.
Siemens Financial Services told the BBC at the time that it
is not responsible for deciding the retail price at which any solution it finances is bought or sold. This is a matter for the vendor and customer.
The banks and other lenders have an unenviable dilemma. If they chase the debt, they can seem hard-hearted. But if they don't pursue it, either from the individual leaseholder or the leasing broker, they have to write it off. And if that decision is taken by one of the banks that's part-owned by the taxpayer, it impacts upon all of us. Business journalist and leasing industry expert Brendan Malkin.
It is shocking to think that UK high street banks have been caught out in these leasing cases and as a result have had to write off millions of pounds of taxpayers' money.
We asked the British Banking Association to discuss the issue, but our request was declined. Brendan Malkin warns that because of the recession, more leasing scandals are bound to come to light.
The UK industry had what I would describe as a large number of these types of scams, which emerged midway through the economic downturn and the credit crunch. So around about 2009, 2010, there were 6 or 7 in the UK alone. Mainly they occurred in the telecom sector, so I would say it's very widespread.
So what's the leasing industry doing to clean up its act? Not enough, according to lawyer Patrick Battersby, who represented the golf club owners.
It strikes me as unsatisfactory that when people who enter into leasing arrangements such as occurred here did not have any regulator that they could turn to ask for assistance and deal with the matter. We as solicitors, for example, have a very good regulator who, if you have any complaints about a solicitor, they can go to and they can get immediate redress. Perhaps that's something that the leasing industry should be looking at.
Julian Rose is from the Finance and Leasing Association, the trade organisation. What did he have to say about our findings?
We are very concerned to hear about the problems that you have reported. The behaviour of some equipment salespeople is causing problems for customers who then go on to finance their investments using leasing. And we're striving to work with the Department for Education, for example, when it comes to schools, to get those salespeople under control.
But people who've fallen foul of what they regard as mis-sold leasing agreements say that your organisation is ineffective. You cannot hold your members to account when things go wrong.
We operate a complaints handling service which is very widely publicised. We don't get a great number of complaints, but where they do come in the majority of cases, we're able to help the customer to resolve their difficulties with the finance company.
If you don't mind me saying so, it sounds a little bit like an industry where everybody is able to pass the buck. The banks say that the leases are sold to them by the leasing companies. The leasing companies themselves say that it's salespeople lower down the chain who are doing the mis-selling. It's an organisation where it's very easy for everyone involved to say, nothing to do with me, Governor.
This is a very regulated field. There are many types of regulation affecting the activities of the salespeople in this area, so there is a lot of protection for businesses, and I think that is why the number of problems relative to the total size of the use of asset finance is remarkably small.
But it's a big issue for the hairdressers, teachers, doctors and golf club owners who have been left holding leases they can't afford. Not to mention the banks, whose involvement and financial exposure is still an unfolding story.